So this is video 8 from the Sensation and Perception unit. This is looking now at perceptual organization. This is the first part in a series of videos. Specifically, this one, you might want to title it, is looking at the Gestalt principle and looking at how we group. But let's take us back to perception. Perception is the process of organizing and interpreting sensory information. It enables us to recognize meaningful objects and events. This process clearly occurs in the brain. Okay, perception tries to create an interpretation of what the stimulus is. So we've been talking a lot about the stimulus, a lot about the receptors, okay, how it travels to the brain, but now let's talk about how the brain interprets information. This goes off of the top-down processing. Top-down processing is looking at information processing guided by higher-level mental processing, as when we construct perceptions, we draw on our experiences. So once again, top-down processing is causing us to think about our experiences that we've had, prior knowledge. So what we're going to see is really going to be impacted by what we already know. One way we organize information in our brain is by using the Gestalt theory. It examines the way our brain organizes information. We organize information by a whole, opposed to seeing all the parts. When given a cluster of sensation, our brain organizes the parts together. The whole is the sum of its parts. To bring order in what we're seeing, we try and group things together. So under the Gestalt effects here, you have 3 different images. The middle image appears to look like a dog. However, it's not a dog. It's a bunch of different chunked dots together. We close off and create it because we look at and organize information by the whole opposed to all of its parts. Same thing with the panda. It's not necessarily a panda, okay, but it appears to be a panda because our eyes are closing off those areas. So this is an example of the Gestalt principle. But what do you see? If you had to jot down what you see here. Do you see, did you state that you saw a cube or 8 different circles with a bunch of white lines? Or did you see a cube? So meant to say, did you see a bunch of different circles or did you see a cube? Okay, most of you stated that you saw the cube, not 8 different circles with white lines in it. Reason why you said that is because you're looking at the whole picture opposed to all of its individual parts. Here's another one. Hopefully this will go a little bit better. Here's another example of the Gestalt principle. What do you see? Most of us is trying to look at the whole opposed to all the individual parts. Do you see vases or do you see faces? This is known as the figure ground principle. The organization of the visual field, a lot of times we create images in the background because of it. Make sure you've drawn in your notes the nectar cube and the figure ground because these are questions that are often that pop up on the test. So the Gestalt principle, one way the brain organizes information is by grouping them together. Grouping is the perceptual tendency to organize stimuli into coherent groups. The 5 different ways the brain groups information is by grouping it by proximity, similarity, continuity, connectedness, and closure. So we're now going to look at the Gestalt principle and how they group information. This is the different ways that we actually group information. First way we group information is by proximity. So make sure you jot down the definition, pause it, and maybe take a picture of the different images for yourself or draw them in your notes. Proximity is grouping principle that organizes information by how closely the figures are presented. We group things based upon how close they are together. So on this first image up here, okay, the squares appear to be very spread out and further apart. So you might see this as 9 different squares. However, if you look at the image below, you may perceive it as one image. Over here, if I asked you how many lines do you see, would you say 6 or would you say 3? Most people say 3 versus the 6 because they're closer together. We also group things based upon how close they are in the United States. We group things by the northwest, south, southwest, northern central, okay, southeast, okay. We also do coast, north coast. We group things based upon how close they are. Similarity. Similarity is another principle. It's a grouping principle that organizes information by similarities. So if structures look similar, our brains begin to organize them as the same. So if we had to look at these lines here, you would probably group it into two different categories, the black lines and the white lines, because you're grouping them by how similar they are. You also may group the three different regions, the mountain regions, the flatlands, and potentially the cities. You're grouping these areas based upon how similar they are. Continuity is the grouping principle that organizes information by smooth, continuous patterns rather than discontinuous ones. The eyes tend to follow patterns. So you're grouping things together based upon the lines on the page. You follow this line on the page. You follow these lines on the page. You follow this as an X. You follow patterns. Connectedness is the grouping principle that organizes information by images that are linked together. When things are similar and linked, we perceive the images as a unit. Okay, here we are, there's three different units. Okay, we're linking these people all together as a unit. And another one of connectedness is the shoes. Closure, probably my favorite. Closure is the grouping principle that organizes information by filling in the gaps to complete an image. Okay, we're closing off the lines again for the circle, the triangle, and the triangle again, or maybe the circles. We're also closing off the image for IBM. We're creating letters. And lastly, you're closing off the image of the squirrel. So again, make sure that you've drawn a bunch of those principles, the grouping strategies in your notes, the Nectar Cube, and Figure Ground.